how can you resist this bus,
I have one.
pulling into your parking lot, and then, the executives and the buyers come down and they come to you and they experience your tech, and it's just a cool.
I think we should talk about it.
The Margeteers.
Hi, Mark.
Hi, Margaret.
So today we're going to talk about big budgets.
Big budgets. Big
So
companies, mature companies. Good place to be.
very good place to be as far as you get a little bit more autonomy on your budget, hopefully. You probably have more audacious goals, but you probably have more broadness of your goals as well, right? I would assume if you're a big company, now you probably have somebody focused on like analysts. You have somebody focused on a ton of spend, right?
Yeah.
Then somebody who's, as I was saying before, the brand money, the goals where it's just impressions is your wonderful metrics.
I love it.
What do you think?
I think one of the blessings, and maybe a curse too, for a large company with a nice marketing spend, is that you do start to build those silos of specialty
Yeah,
uh,
sure.
with your team. And whether or not you're using an outside firm, you definitely have at this point a really nice, robust footprint of all of the different marketing verticals, the broad
Yep.
acumen.
So let's say you're starting the year with multi-million-dollar pound budget. Again, is there something that you're going to say? And let's say, your company's increase or the product increase isn't necessarily going to be doubling, right? We're
Mhm.
not doing these. You might have a decent amount of market share already. You have a really strong foundation, right?
Mhm.
There's probably hopefully there's some brand notoriety, recognition. How are you going to utilize your millions?
I love that question. I love how you pose that question. I think, as with all things, it depends, but there's always some sort of blend of brand, lead gen and prospecting, and
Mm-hmm.
of course, educational content marketing, all of that neat sort of stuff that really kind of compels the market to understand who you are and what you're doing and the value that you bring to the table. I think probably one of the challenging things for a really large organization is the complexity of the Martech stack.
So, we talk about Martech stack a lot. So now you're a massive company. How much you're probably spending on the enterprise aspects of it? How do you want to expand upon that now? Or how do you, Mark, want to expand upon talking about the Martech stack?
Well, I think at this point you have a fairly complex combination of technologies. If you've done a really good job of deploying it, there's some interrelation between them, some sort of automation, sharing of data, etc. I think one of the challenging pieces is you're also going to, at this point, have very vertical things that you're doing
Yeah.
with specialists.
Sorry, when you talk about verticals, do you
Yeah,
also consider like different geographics, different verticals? No.
definitely, especially in the field marketing department. So when we think about content marketing, if it's a company that's global or a company that focuses on different verticals, having field marketing or vertical marketing organizations or specialists is definitely a big part of that level of maturity for sure.
Yeah. What is the most ridiculous thing you've ever spent your budget on?
Oh no, you put me on the hot seat.
Yeah.
Oh, the most ridiculous thing.
And it could be really impactful. You're just like, I can't believe. Oh, I have one actually.
Okay, what was that?
An employee did like a race card, like local race car driving, and
Oh,
we
fun.
put on our logo on his car. It wasn't very expensive, and he was just very excited about it. But it was just a funny thing where I went to my designer and I was like, "Do you ever get bored of the things I ask you to brand?" Maybe that one wasn't as weird. We did do like custom origamis and things like that, which was a
Oh,
bit
fun.
different. But the considering like the very firm technology world I live in,
Okay.
B2B SaaS, I think is so funny. Be like, okay, we're putting this on a car, but everyone was so excited. So you're like, okay.
I love that. I have a B2G example, but
Oh,
I personally
what's
didn't lead
G?
B2G, business to government. I personally didn't lead the project. I
That's
had
okay.
colleagues that led the project, but I have to tell you, it was really interesting, which was branding a bus, essentially.
Okay.
I'm having our technology footprint inside the bus,
Okay.
driving the bus around the country
Oh my
to
God.
give in-person demos of our tech,
By
like
the way,
in a roadshow.
those roadshows always do really well.
I know. How
Did
can
that go
you
well?
resist? How can you resist this bus,
I have one.
pulling into your parking lot, and then, the executives and the buyers come down and they come to you and they experience your tech, and it's just it's experiential. It's something different. It gets them out of the boardroom and into really engaging with your technology. I think it's brilliant. It was very expensive, but it was super, super brilliant. So I love those kinds of things. I think that that's like a really great example, and I wish I could take credit for it, but I can't.
I know someone who loves a roadshow. It's funny because you meet like different marketers along the way, and I don't want to say everyone has their MO, but everyone
Yeah.
has their MO. I was talking about this actually with a friend of mine in San Francisco, where it's like, but equally like they still work. Like your little kind of this is your campaign product. This is how it works, and you just kind of continue to take it to each place you go. But I know someone who loves the roadshow.
Yeah,
It's funny.
roadshows are great. That's for sure.
What's the most ridiculous thing I've spent money on? I'm gonna think about this and then we'll come back.
Okay.
I
Okay.
feel like I've never gotten to do anything like super wild.
I didn't do anything super wild, but I've definitely done guerrilla things. So I think I mentioned in a prior episode, my first marketing company that I ever started, I was 17 years old. And I was just trying to think outside the box. And I literally
Okay.
I bought pizza boxes. My mom had a catering company, so she had access to a vendor where I could buy pizza boxes. So
Yeah.
I bought pizza boxes. I made pizzas, and then I delivered the pizzas. And when you opened up the lid, it was like my main name was Paradiso. Margaret Paradiso delivers.
Oh,
And
great.
like a little thing about my, expertise, which at that point was mostly graphic design in like India ink and illustrations and logo design back in the day when it was all done by hand. And so I would like go and deliver homemade pizza in these pizza boxes to
Amazing.
companies.
Did you
And
get work?
yeah, it worked. It worked
Great.
great. And I even had a couple people say, "Hey, can I have your pizza dough recipe? Because that's really good." Which is a riot because it was sweetbread. I use sweetbread as a pizza dough. Um,
Amazing.
I know. So, but just little things like that there. That's guerrilla, and that is nimble, and it only cost me the money of the boxes and the flour and the
Yeah,
tomato
yeah.
sauce.
And your
You
time and your time. I
know,
always want to
so-
point this out because everyone talks about kind of the guerrilla stuff and they completely discount their own time to do it, but the time is super important. A great story I just heard, Stephen Bartlett, who does Diary of CEO, when his book came out, he said he had his list of influencers that he wanted to send the book to, and he made a box and made money with the face of the influencer on the money, so that when they received the box, it's like his book sitting on a bed of money with your face on it. And he said doing it himself, I think his cost was saying it was 10K instead of 100, and it got so much earned media because he's really playing into a lot of psychological behavior things for his campaigns. And he's like, because who can resist like then taking a ton of selfies with like your face on money? Like it can't be resisted.
I love it. Yeah,
I like
that's
things like
super
that.
cool. That's super cool. I think one of the challenges that the big company has is how do you kind of give that level of service and intimacy in your programs
Yeah.
and still, do it at scale. I think the biggest challenge for any large marketing department is scale. How do you still do things in a way that feels authentic and like it's not mass produced and that it's not being done the same for everyone? There's a nuance to that. There's a magic to that where the customer feels like it's for them.
Yeah.
And,
But I believe heavily in like ABM. And I do think like when you are a large company, this account-based marketing, I think like when you're in that space, you do have a luxury that you can be slightly more personalized on a larger scale. And to be brash and say that like, how do you do it at scale? It kind of isn't your problem to figure out when you're inside the company. It's usually the agency you've hired to deliver it their problem. I know that's really naughty to say, but it is that space of saying, here's 100 people that we need to get this box to. You figure it out. And I know some people might not think 100 is scale, but the truth is, I think there's only 73. There's less than 100 quote unquote enterprise companies in France, and so sometimes you're dealing with two people at that big company if you're going after those other big companies, and that is scale. But I think it's a matter of good communication internally on your teams to be able to say, this is worked out in my market, and like being able to then, that's how you scale. I think is having the freedom within your field marketers to try what they can with their budgets and then swap like
I
across.
love that. I love that. You mentioned something like in as part of that sentence that I thought is really key, which is leveraging the know-how of the people on the team. So the other cool thing that comes with having a larger team and a larger marketing budget is you've got more people with broader experience,
Yeah.
and they can each bring to the table ideas and concepts and things that have worked for them in the past, which I think is brilliant. I think one of the challenges with that is sometimes you're thinking of those things in the moment and you didn't necessarily set aside budget for that
Oh yeah, all the time.
ago, right? 6 months ago. So we touched early on in a prior episode about making sure that there's some level of discretionary spending. And because there's going to be magic, there's going to be things that happen, there's going to be inspiration, there's going to be a market trend, there's going to be something that you want to leverage at some course during the year that you hadn't anticipated, and that
Yeah,
you
for
need to
sure.
make those trade-offs, either pulling it from funding for other projects that you had planned or having a discretionary amount that you can reallocate towards something really profound that you come up with during the course of the year.
Because there's always, I mean, I think that the marketing department has this rhythm of right now. So we're taping this in January, like January, early Feb is like planning. Then things are like, then you're creating. Like I think this quarter is all about creating. And then Q2 is all about execution. And at least then here in Europe, you need to get people by the first week of July, like when school starts to get out, and then things go disgustingly quiet. And then everyone comes back the first week of September, and it's only about execution for 4 months. Like, so it's a little bit difficult, I think, to have your creative stage in the end of the year, because you kind of need to make sure like, no, we've built the big assets and it's just lead gen, it's just closing. That kind of feels like the pace that we sort of have. So you kind of have this time to really think creatively, either under pressure or because somebody's brought you an opportunity, or it's January.
Okay. I
I
love
don't know,
that.
that kind of
I
feel, and especially like in a big corporate space too, and kind of the always on stuff and the automation and making sure those things are kind of ticking along, I think is important. I think it's interesting too, when we talk about budgets, to think about the differences of video quality as you get larger, having done a ton of different videos and so forth. Look, we're full discretion, we're taping this on Zoom, right? And with my startups, we use StreamYard a lot to create video content because it's actually quite inexpensive for what you can get out of that particular tool to have a studio. And I think because of COVID, everybody has a lot more grace for less productive quality. But I am starting to see that really slick video case study starting to come back. That was probably a couple of days, has that nice sheen on it. And I'm talking from like a B2B standpoint, because obviously
Mhm.
B2C is always like really beautiful commercial kind of
Right,
advertisements.
right.
But I think it's interesting when we talk about, yeah, just budgets in video. I always find so fascinating, because partially I spent a few years doing it, but also, the difference of the one-man band versus when you bring in a producer, and then when you bring in the more expensive videos. I think, like, not necessarily, we were agency side, so it wasn't the most expensive thing or the craziest thing I'd spend on, but we had gone into a client. So for a client, we had gone into their client, which was a coffee roastery, and we built a studio in their roastery. And they spent, I mean, project's long gone, so I'm gonna still talk
Yeah.
about it. But like, we brought in like crazy video aspects. They created this whole like studio within the client. We did all this slow motion stops. There was all this incredible cinematography that took place, and they used 4 seconds of that particular shot. And when I say they, it was our own edit. It's like,
Okay.
I thought it was ridiculous.
Okay.
And I said it at the time. I was like, this is ridiculous.
Wow.
But I mean, it was a beautiful video. Like, and that's a nice thing to do. But I think like that's definitely a corporate sized
It
video
definitely is. And there was a period of time where corporates were going for that kind of
really slick.
well, stepping back a little bit, they were going for the kind of scrappy, authentic, candid feel.
Yeah.
But I think that people kind of there's such good storytelling that can be done with a really high production video. There's always going to be a hunger for it, regardless of what tools are out there that makes
Yeah.
it easy for anybody to create a video. At the end of the day, what's really going to differentiate a big brand is their ability to do that in an expert studio production level way that really kind of allows people to have that suspension of disbelief. They get wrapped into the reality and the feeling and the emotion of that video. And, it becomes storytelling and immersive and something that you just cannot do on a tiny budget. You have to have a significant budget with a producer, with a director, lighting, you're hiring talent. It's not the internal team playing roles anymore, right? Like you're hiring actors and models and all of that to come at it in a very different way. And that's a nice chunk of change for sure.
Yeah.
And then they get to apply, the new technologies and things for lighting and sound management and, all those things that just really make it feel special. There's a talent that it takes that for the internal marketing team. We talk a lot about how, especially in these smaller companies, you're probably outsourcing, et cetera. If you're in a corporate environment, let's say you're a CMO, but you don't have that experience, you have to bring somebody in, a
Mhm.
contractor, a producer, director. You have to bring somebody onto the team that's actually done that before, because if you make a big mistake, it costs a lot of money and your budget goes out the window. And so having somebody who's actually done, high value video project management, creative direction, tying it into a corporate brand storytelling perspective, that's priceless.
Mm.
You have to have that talent on the team. If you don't have it internally, you got to bring it from the outside.
Yeah.
You have to do it. Don't think you can wing it. You can't
Well,
wing. You can't wing it.
I think definitely like in the B2C space, of course, right? Like when
Yeah.
that's your main go to market is going to be through. I think even it's really interesting because even now, like depending on the brands bringing in like video editors or video producers just for your social, I think is quite interesting. And lots of people are doing that. If social is going to be a big part of your play, but it's also so insulting because it'll be like we're looking for like the job app like spec will be so it's so insulting because it'll list like we're looking for the unicorn of all unicorns to deliver our best social brand, and we're going to pay you a whopping 35K. Like, it's so normal. Like, you see that all of the time. And luckily I'm on a few groups where people will write back. Someone did a really nice thing on a group the other day to say, I just want to point out what you've put in this list is 10 different skill sets. And so I hope you're paying this person accordingly. But it is like the rise of, what I find hard about social being its own department is that it should bleed into everything, not social, but the creative that social is showing should bleed into everything. And so I think that's a real danger of budget, is when you do create these silos of how to make sure the communication is key, and how are we making sure, again, if we say, like, I remember this campaign where we were doing, I don't know, something in email, and we just kind of did a space like, okay, Australia's going to do the first A/B test, and they're going to test this. And there was, for whatever reasons, we only have limited emails we could send. And so, like, Australia, so like we had budget, but it was a constraint of how much could we send to different parts of the database and this kind of thing. So we did this kind of progressive learnings by each territory would then, like, take the learnings of the last geography and then add their own test onto it. And then you had something significant, and then they added their next test. And then we kind of did that until you got to our largest database, which hopefully then has the most tests. And let's be honest, we're not necessarily at this, it was kind of an opt-in campaign sort of thing. So what we're looking for is, like, color of button, placement of button. I mean, this is so far down priorities of, like, where you are in certain spaces, but it was a really interesting way to utilize a global budget for best outcomes, and saying, okay, we're going to do, or everyone gets to do round one. You take this, you take messaging, you take subject line, you take placement, you take color, and then kind of all swap for the second. It's an interesting one.
Very interesting. I like that. I like the scale of that. I mean, that's a significant project.
It was.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. I'm just curious how you budgeted for that, because
it's all internal people.
Okay.
It was a budget of time, and then there was, like, timelines that had to do with the event that we were going towards. So it was a matter of saying, like, we knew we needed to do this kind of scrub, I guess, and saying, okay, this is and maybe it just followed, like, in my mind, it was like we did it versus from the smallest database to largest database, which I know has its own, significance as far as findings go, but we went to a statistically significant finding in that each realm. But maybe it just had to do with, like, how the sun travels also. maybe it was that, but it was kind of like it was through, like, our automation team, which was an internal team, and they were very, very tightly collaborated. So they were the ones that were kind of driving it, and then telling the markets what they needed for them as far as creative goes and things like that.
Okay.
So that was a time-based one.
Okay. I really like that. I don't know. There's complexity in these conversations that we're having right now, that I think people are on the startup side, or they're starting to scale, and you start thinking about, getting ready for having these kind of more complex, actually, marketing programs, right? It becomes a marketing program that's across functions. That's one of the things that there's a little bit of, I guess, a challenge in terms of how to budget for that ahead of time, whether it's time, materials, external resources that might be involved. So all the more reason why I think having buckets is a good idea, and then reconciling those against marketing programs. Having a way to kind of think about it from that perspective. And of course, so we haven't talked about attribution yet, or return on investment. And I think when we're talking about these really complex programs, we can expect that leadership is going to be asking, where are we at in terms of return on investment for these programs, and using that to substantiate whether or not you get approved for the next project, or whether or not you're well funded in the following year. I think that's probably worthy of its own episode, but definitely something to be thinking about when you're thinking about large scale marketing budgets, is you're going to be expected to deliver some level of value back to the organization for the spend that you're putting in place.
I had a company I was advising, and we were having a chat one day, and I got so jealous. I was like, I'm so jealous that your buyer is fairly low manager.
Okay.
I was like, it just kind of felt like the scale was so much possible if you're getting like a tool for a department. It's not a whole core systems change. It's not a whole way of changing how you work or all these aspects, but it was just one department could use this tool, and therefore someone on that managerial team could put this on their credit card. And I was like, wow, how lucky. Like, that's a great project, because I think the budgeting gets complex the more people you have to influence.
You mean the more people at each customer?
Yeah,
Like
for your prospect,
complexity
for
within
how
the
many people,
organization.
yeah, for your
Within-
buyer, how many people within the buying group need to be influenced within the discussion. And I say influence is just different sets of people need different sets of information, different sets of content, and that can, it's important, but it just adds a lot of time and complexity to make sure that you're servicing all of the stakeholders. And then getting to, I think I mentioned this episode last, like doing an HR campaign. And that was really like that was like a far influencing. They weren't the buyer at all, but they had a say in the final adoption. And so the ROI, as you're talking about, is totally different because,
Absolutely.
again, it's kind of more ABM, where it's saying, did the people on our list hear the message of the benefits? Great.
Yeah. But this is one of the things I love about ABM, right? Is that you're actually mapping who all those decision makers are, and you're forced to make sure that you can speak to each of them about what value they're going to derive from the solution. I like that. I like that complexity.
I mean, what's interesting to me, like when we talk about like budget and spending and planning, I'm thinking about a scenario where we got halfway through the year and something happened from the sales cycle where all of a sudden I go, no, we don't need to fill the database. We just need to be doing ABM. And so that takes an entirely different, for their particular budget, like we weren't doing more than a few tactics, if you will. And so it's saying, okay, stop this. We need to really recalibrate everything midstream and see where it is. And then you have to think of ROI in a totally different way, because you're going to be paying way more CPA. You're going to be devoting a lot more time. I think it feels harder sometimes to say we've devoted this entire brochure so 3 people see it, and as long as they saw it, we've done our job. And I think that's harder to communicate sometimes. I've been thinking a lot lately about when we talk about account-based marketing. I was thinking when I was in my 20s in New York, a friend of mine was junior PR at a independent movie house, right? Or the independent horror movie house. And during award season, she'd be like, hey, do you want to come watch this movie? And I worked from home. And so I did it like 4 p.m., whatever. And I worked from home before working from home was a thing, because, sneak out at 4 or 2 or whatever. And basically I'd be like, what's happening? And she's like, during the award season, they need all of the voters to see the movie on the best possible screen, right? So you need to see the best possible screen. And so what they do is and this is what I think ABM is. So sometimes I could come to a theater and see a nice movie, and this whole theater has been rented out so that one person could watch this movie. Genuinely, because this one person has to come and be able to vote for whatever award it is and see the movie in, better than a little screener or something. So I think like this helps to explain ABM is like sometimes we have to rent a whole theater so one person can see it. Now, it doesn't mean that other people can't benefit. We can invite our other stakeholders. We can invite the other people that are going to enjoy it, other people to enjoy it. But the success was the person we rented it for showed up and saw it.
Wow.
Right. But that's part of that whole, because independent movie, you need to get the awards.
Yeah,
that's trying to sell it or whatever, distribution. It was great. I saw some celebrities sometimes, so it was great. But it's an interesting, but that's a totally different kind of budget, like, can you imagine trying to do your budget planning of there's 100 people that you need to vote, and what's the cost of potentially 100 theaters?
Oh,
I mean, obviously, you hopefully get more people to one, but
Right.
worst case scenario, right?
Yeah, that's some tremendous skill right there. That's for sure.
To be 20s in New York again. It was a good time. It's fine. Everyone was at the bottom of the ladder, but we had such access. And I to this day think about that all the time. That's a totally different story. All right, so big budgets, this was obviously like a super broad conversation, far reaching. But I guess it's kind of, again, as long as you stay really core to your foundation of like what are your growth tactics, what are your metrics, what are your goals, how can you work strategically along because even though you have a big budget, it's still a budget, right? We didn't really say that. So
Right.
your spend could be millions, but you still have to stay into the budget of it, geographically be wise about how you're doing it. So I think like my takeaways and advice is how can you, even within large budgets, find ways to scale with your teammates. I think that we did like a big research project with a big consultancy, and then each geography contributes and it goes further, and then it becomes a richer campaign, things like that. So just consider like how can you leverage your teammates for even larger impact, then everybody gets to save a little bit for their discretionary stuff that happens later in the year.
I love it.
What do you think? Our key takeaway?
I think one of the things to be really mindful about is just making sure that you're going to get value out of the spend.
Yeah.
Expect that someone's going to want you to be able to quantify that in some way. Maybe not in that budget cycle, but maybe when you're asking for budget for the next, for the next thing, and just be prepared to be thinking about it and measuring it in a way that you can substantiate it, or even you might wind up saying, okay, it wasn't worth it. Like, it's not always that you want to use that mindset to be able to ask for that money again. Sometimes it's just to know whether it was effective or not. And if it wasn't, maybe you abandon it or you change it.
I love it. Well, thank you so much to those watching. Like, share, comment if you have questions about your budgets. If you want to share the craziest thing you've spent money on, I would love to hear what that is.
I'd love to hear that too.
Yeah, like what was your like, I cannot believe that we're buying this today. That would be great. And I think next time we're going to close out this series just coming up with that crossover of large and small and scale, and yeah, join us.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you, Margaret.
Thank you, Mark.
All the marketing and marketing for all.